I found a man running behind me every day. Then I read his notebook. What was inside forced me to steal evidence, go to the cops, and change the fate of others. I still remember the first time I noticed him, the way he slipped into the frame of my evenings like a shadow that never quite belonged to the night. At first it felt almost comforting, a quiet, nameless presence that matched the rhythm of my leaving work and the small, predictable choreography of my town. Then one day I found a line in a notebook that made my stomach drop, and every ordinary step after that started to feel like a trap. My name is Jenifer, I'm 19, and most of my life was built inside the steady, warm orbit of my grandparents' house. They taught me to be kind, to help when I could, to trust in decency, and that made me the kind of person who still smiles at strangers and carries spare change for coffee. Life was simple, drama with friends, exams, the messy normal of being 19. Nothing felt dangerous. Until him. He first appeared months ago. I used to catch glimpses on my drive home, an average-looking man, maybe 35, running down my street at the same time every evening. You'd think I'd shrug it off. I did at first. People have routines. Runners pick the same loops. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was training. I told myself all those sensible things and kept walking. But there was something precise about him. Not just the way he ran, but the ritual in his timing. Same path. Same stretch. Same hour. A human metronome. My curiosity nudged me one day when it was scorching hot and I had a water bottle in my hand. I stepped onto the pavement and waited. He jogged by, face flushed, and I held the bottle out like it was the most natural thing in the world. He stopped as if the universe had offered him a gift. He smiled in a way that was almost too grateful, like an actor pretending to be surprised, and said he was training for a triathlon. I nodded, satisfied, and watched him go. That was the sort of detail that fit into the tidy story my brain wanted to believe. Weeks later, I wasn't driving as much because I'm saving money for college and life, so I started walking to class some mornings. The first time I walked, he was there. Same rhythm, same distance behind me. I thought coincidence. The second time, it felt a bit off. The third time I felt watched, like the air around me had been rearranged. I tried to stay calm. I told myself he was just a runner. People follow people sometimes, on accident. But the runner in me knew pacing, and this man was calculating his catches. The tiny details that used to pass unnoticed turned into signs. He matched my pace. He slowed when I slowed. He sped up when I looked back. On one walk, curiosity and a prickle of fear pushed me to follow him after he finished his run. He wound through lanes that didn't lead to any houses, checking a watch and writing in a small notebook. I hid behind a hedge and watched until I saw his hands rummaging through his pocket and pulling out that notebook. It was smaller than a diary, the kind you could slip into an inner jacket pocket. Up close I could make out cramped handwriting and numbers, times, distances, notes. I should have left it at that and walked away. Instead I crept closer like somebody in a bad movie and read a few words through the slant of his handwriting. 7:15 she leaves. I take 4:30 to catch up. Goal, reduced to 3 o'clock. Wait for the right day. My world folded inward. Something cold and heavy landed in my chest. It was not a training log. It wasn't a plan for a race. It was a map of me. I ran home crying, and for the first time in my life I felt the world tilt with a kind of irrational fragility. My grandparents made me go to the police. They told me I had to be certain, that I couldn't live like a mouse waiting for a paw. The police listened with polite boredom, asked the usual questions, name, address, whether he'd said anything threatening, and despite the notebook I described, they told me there was not much they could do without an actual crime. They suggested I change my routine, that I walk with friends, that I get a restraining order if anything happened. Their faces were sympathetic, but their help felt like paperwork and pamphlets, useful in theory, useless in reality. When I left the station, I felt more exposed than when I had walked in. The runner didn't stop. He kept appearing on my street, like punctuation marks at the end of sentences I'd been writing without looking. Sometimes he'd run past when my grandparents were in the garden, and we'd all pretend not to notice. I started altering small things, taking different paths, varying the time I left, always checking the rearview mirror. For a while, it worked like a Band-Aid, temporary and slightly tacky. One afternoon I decided to test my courage. I told myself I needed evidence, or at least confirmation. I followed him again, this time with my best friend Karen on the phone, whispering like spies. I kept my distance and watched the same choreography unfold. He ran, he checked his watch, he scribbled. He stopped near a lamppost and wrote something down with a deliberate hand. I don't know why, but I edged closer until I could see the page. There it was, rows and rows of notes, not only about me but about other girls' routes, times, bus numbers, alley shortcuts. She wears headphones and doesn't lock her bike. My blood thickened. On one page, underlined and impatient, was a phrase I couldn't unsee. Finally saw her again. He wasn't training to win a race. He was training to be ready. I told Karen everything that night. Her voice on the phone fractured with the kind of fear that lives in one tight, high place when someone's life feels like it could be stolen. Together we made a plan that sounded insane the more we said it out loud. We would get that notebook. It felt ridiculous and heroic at the same time. Two kids trying to snatch proof from a man who had turned observation into obsession. We rehearsed the theft like a school play. We picked times, roles, contingencies. We chose a bench where he'd pause, a bush where I could duck, a distraction Karen could make with her bike. The more we plotted, the more concrete it felt. It was the kind of plan that grows teeth when fear sharpens itself into determination. On the night we planned to take the notebook, I slept like someone who thinks the sleeping will be the last legitimate thing she does before danger begins. The plan worked, almost. We got the notebook, but the man nearly caught us. He shouted, his voice a low animal sound I didn't recognize, the air around us suddenly loud with the shock of being wrong-footed. We ran, sprinting down streets I used to know by heart, the notebook clutched between us like a small, dangerous prize. Back at my grandparents' house we locked the doors and spread the pages on the kitchen table like evidence in a crime drama. The notebook was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just my walks. It cataloged other women in the neighborhood, dates, times, careful descriptions. At the back, pages were torn where the ink had been scratched out in a panic, and on one page there was a list with 3 names crossed out. The way my hands trembled made the letters swim. Karen hyperventilated into a paper bag while I tried to breathe through loud thoughts. That night we decided to go to the police the next morning with the notebook in hand. For the first time I believed they would see it and move. For the first time in days I slept without staring at the window. 2 months later, I'm writing this from a small desk in my grandparents' living room, the light of a lamp that smells faintly of lemon peel and wood. The story picks up here because things changed, dramatically and messily. The officer who looked at our notebook did so with a face I couldn't read. Surprise, guilt, maybe recognition. He pulled us into an interrogation room, and a detective took over, tone low and brisk, like someone shifting gears when a coupling finally clicks. The detective said the notebook matched details from 3 missing girls over the past year, routes, times, even little habits that only someone watching from the edges would write down. My stomach dropped again, but this time the drop had a strange edge of purpose. They assigned us plainclothes officers who trailed us in an unremarkable car, a presence we could feel but not see. For the first few days, it felt like safety had a soft edge we could sleep against. Then the police asked me to help. They wanted me to walk my old route again, to become bait, so they could watch the man's pattern in real time. It felt obscene and right at the same time, like helping in a way that exposed me to the thing I feared most. I said yes, because there was no other honest thing to do. I wanted to end the waiting. Days passed where nothing happened. My nerves frayed with false calm. I told myself to breathe. Then he came back, just like before. Same stride, same notebook, only now sweat and desperation had replaced whatever actor's calm he'd worn before. The detective told me to let him get close, to let him make his move. It felt like stepping into a trap you had to set yourself. The night it happened, everything narrowed to the beat of my shoes on pavement. He came at me from behind, fast, hands like something you hide in the palm of your fear. He put a cloth over my face, and the world folded away into muffled shapes. There was darkness and wakefulness, and then a hospital ceiling that spun slightly above me. I woke up to the orange-brown fluorescent hum of the hospital and a feeling like a weight had been lifted and then dropped in the same breath. The detective was there, eyes tired but triumphant. He told me they had him, that they'd found the man, that the notebook was a key they'd been missing in a string of cases. Parts of the story are still under wraps, the police delayed us from talking publicly while they wrapped up paperwork and interviews. That's why I'm late telling this. 2 months later, I'm back on my feet and writing because I want the record to say that fear can be answered with stubbornness, that friends can be armor, and that people, ordinary people, can help bring light into the places obsession hides. I'm proud, humbly and weirdly, of what we did. I'm proud that the notebook we stole helped the police tie dots together that might have stayed invisible. But more than pride, I'm left with a scab of a question that won't stop bothering me. How long had he been watching me before I noticed? How many ordinary days had been logged, measured, and folded into his routine before I realized I was the subject of it? I still have nightmares that rewind to the page where he wrote goal, reduced to 3 o'clock. I still watch the streetlights change at dusk. This is the part where I close my little entry and say I'm safe, and in many practical ways I am. The man is behind bars, and the police say they'll keep watch on the neighborhood. Karen and I sleep with the curtains open sometimes, ridiculous as that sounds, like we want to remind ourselves daylight exists. But I know that life after you see the worst in someone is never exactly the same. My grandparents insist I go back to normal. School, friends, the small routines that stitch days together. I'm trying. There are pieces I haven't told publicly yet, things I'm not sure how to preach into words without opening old wounds. But I owe the chance to write this, an honest ledger of fear turned into action. And I'm leaving this with a question I still ask aloud when I walk past the spot where I first gave him a bottle of water. How long had I been a practice target before the man decided to make me the final run? I told them everything. The runner, the bottle of water, the way he matched my steps, and the notebook with times and notes that made my skin crawl. My grandparents made me go to the police, and they listened without really moving. They gave me pamphlets and advice to change my routine, but nothing that felt like the kind of protection I wanted. Karen and I started planning to get that notebook ourselves because waiting felt worse than acting. After the police visit, I tried to convince myself to keep living like a person, not like prey. For a few days I followed the advice. I walked with my grandparents. I took different routes. I told myself the officers in uniforms outside the station were a thin kind of safety. But patterns have a stubborn way of looping back. The man kept running the same route at the same time, like a metronome that refused to reset. One morning, I decided that hiding wasn't bravery. It was surrender. I started walking alone again, early, when the town still smelled like coffee and sun-warmed concrete. I did it on purpose because I needed to know whether the notebook had been a fluke, or whether the man was actually watching me, day after day. That first walk after the police visit felt like an audition for panic. Every footstep louder than the last, my phone buzzing with a text from Karen that simply read, "Be careful." He showed up like he always did, small and deliberate, a figure tightening the space behind me. This time I kept my hands in my pockets and my head down, pretending I was absorbed in my own thoughts. He matched my pace. He made a small adjustment when I glanced over my shoulder, enough to stay in sync. He checked his watch and paused, looking around as if deciding whether to write. He sat on a low wall for a minute and stretched, the casualness almost a performance. I let my curiosity pull me behind him again, only a block back. The route he took wound deeper into streets I knew were empty in the morning, swallowed by garages and hedges. When he stopped at a lamppost to write, the morning light hit the pages and the letters glinted. I wasn't close enough to read, but I could see how carefully he wrote, like someone recording everything they didn't want to forget. I went home and sat on the stairs for too long, stomach an endless, low churn. My grandparents asked if I was okay, and I said the word fine until it felt empty. I called Karen and told her what I had seen. Her silence on the other end was immediate and then sharp, and she said the thing that made my mouth form a small, hard line. "We can't just keep guessing. We need proof. He isn't just a runner." So we plan with the kind of efficiency that fear breeds. Karen drew a schedule on a scrap of paper, times he usually ran, places he paused, where benches offered cover. We rehearsed routes like actors practicing lines. The idea wasn't to confront him face to face. It was to get the notebook, to have pages we could hand over to someone who would act like they believed us. There was a sting of wrongness in it. The idea of creeping around another person's property, of taking something that might belong to someone else, even when that something might be evidence. My grandparents argued until their voices were sore, But when they saw how terrified I was, they softened to a different kind of resolve. If the police wouldn't act, we would make the proof impossible to ignore. They helped us plan in practical ways, flashlights in pockets, a shortcut through the garden that kept us out of sight. Days later, the pattern snapped into place. I followed him again, not as a scared girl but as someone trying to read a map. This time I kept my distance at first, and then closed it like a shadow. He moved with the same patient rhythm until he sat on the bench by the old bakery. He opened the notebook. The page he wrote on that morning had words that were different from the timings and distances. They were small sentences threaded with something too intimate for a training log. I crouched behind a hedge and watched his hand move across the paper. My knees went weak. The little script felt like a verdict. He wasn't running races. He was marking returns and noting when he saw me again. I left before he looked up because I couldn't bear meeting the eyes of someone who had been charting me like a route to be completed. I ran to Karen's house, and we sat at her kitchen table staring at the map we'd made, at the times we'd circled, at the plan that now felt inevitable. We agreed what we'd do next. Wait until a rainy afternoon when fewer neighbors would be outside, approach when he paused at the lamppost, distract him, and take the notebook. We rehearsed one more time, who would watch the street, who would reach, what to do if he woke and shouted. It was a stupidly simple heist for a modern fear, a notebook swap made with hands that trembled but didn't stop. That night I couldn't sleep. The notebook sat in my mind like a moth trapped in a jar, beating against the glass. The plan felt like a promise. Either we got the proof and the police would have to look, or we failed and retreated into a smaller life. But Karen's voice on the phone, steady and fierce, gave me a thin kind of courage. "We take this back," she said. "We make it real." I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the next morning, the way the light would fall on the paper, the crackle of pages being turned, the names we'd find inside. I also imagined the worst, being discovered, running, the sound of a notebook thumping against concrete. The fear sat beside the decision like a second mouth. In the end, the fear didn't tell me not to go. It sharpened my feet. I write this with my heart still loud, because the next part of the story is the one where luck and stupid bravery meet. We're ready, or as ready as two 19-year-olds can be when they decide to steal proof from someone who has been stealing their nights. The day we stole the notebook felt like the worst and bravest thing we'd ever do. Karen and I met early, moving through morning like ghosts. My grandparents pretended to watch TV while I slipped out with gloves and a backpack. At the bench by the bakery, he arrived on schedule, same steady stride. He sat, opened the notebook, and for a second it all looked ordinary. Then Karen dropped her bag with a loud clatter and started apologizing to an imaginary child. He glanced up, annoyed. He closed the notebook and reached for his bottle. That distraction was our cue. I moved in. My hands were steadier than I felt. I slid a finger under the cover and felt the paper, real and thin as a promise. He turned just then, eyes finding mine. "Hey," he barked. He lunged, quick and precise, and grabbed my wrist. Everything happened in a breath. Karen shouted. I pulled. His grip tightened like someone used to making people freeze. We fell, the notebook skidding across the path. A neighbor yelled from a doorway. A delivery van blocked the far end of the street for a blessed 2 minutes. We scrambled up and ran. Back at my grandparents' kitchen table, the notebook felt heavier in the light. Inside were pages of small, careful writing, names, routes, times, notes, headphones, no bag. Takes bus 7, leaves at 6:45. There were dates circled and short phrases like not home or failed. Some names were scratched out hard enough to leave an indented bruise in the paper. The more we read, the colder the room felt. It was not an obsession contained to me. It was a pattern. We didn't sleep. We drove to the police station before the sun fully woke, notebook folded between us. This time the reaction was different. The officer who took the pages sat with a face that finally matched the words. Serious, quick. A detective joined. The notebook filled gaps in their files. Times that matched camera footage, routes that lined up with witness reports. Suddenly our small theft had teeth. For several days the neighborhood felt like a held breath. Patrol cars appeared in odd places. Plainclothes officers lingered where we used to walk, and we were offered a safe place to stay. It felt strange to accept it. like asking for protection meant admitting we'd been small and vulnerable for longer than we'd thought. The detective told us something that rewired the way I understood those pages. The notebook's notes aligned with 3 missing person reports across the past year. We spent hours with detectives, pointing out timestamps and annotations. We had to be precise. This wasn't drama, it was evidence. The police built a plan using the notebook's map, surveillance on likely routes, match times when the man had been spotted, teams ready to act. For the first time since I saw that handwriting, I felt a sliver of relief that wasn't completely bone-deep fear. But even with officers nearby, the notebook had done something permanent. It showed how ordinary life could be cataloged, how a routine can be sketched into a trap. I started noticing small things, the way someone adjusted their headphones, how a woman crossed the street when a car passed. Everyday behavior suddenly looked like a thread someone could pull. Still, the notebook mattered. It turned suspicion into action. The detectives used it to narrow down windows of time to watch, and it fed into interviews and evidence collection. Karen and I were witnesses in a case that felt too large for us, which was terrifying and necessary. After we handed the notebook over, the police thanked us, assigned an officer to keep an eye on my grandparents' block, and told us they would do everything they could. The rest, arrests, court processes, phone calls, was out of our hands. All we had done was small but crucial: take a private ledger of someone's obsession and put it where it could be used to stop him. I still carry the memory of that day like a scar you only see in certain lights. The shock of his hands grabbing my wrist, the rush of the run home, the hush of the kitchen as we open the book, all of it stays. There are times I still flinch if someone matches my pace on the street. There are nights I wake up replaying the pages. But I also carry something else, a stubborn sense that doing the frightening thing, taking action, mattered. Karen and I weren't heroes. We were 2 scared kids who grabbed a piece of evidence and handed it to people who could make it count. That seems small, but sometimes small things cause the right domino to fall. We left the notebook with the detective and tried to sleep with less dread. The police used it to move their case forward, and slowly, the tightness in my chest loosened enough for me to think about normal things again. We didn't get our innocence back. We simply learned a new kind of vigilance and a brittle kind of pride that we hadn't run away from what we saw. The next part is the part one I'm still uneasy about: how the police used the notebook to set a trap, and what happened when they finally tried to catch him. I can only say now that taking the notebook was the moment the story stopped being only ours and became something that could help other people stay alive. The police were slow to act, so Karen and I stole his notebook and handed it over. That notebook matched times and routes in 3 missing person reports and finally made the detectives take our story seriously. They put surveillance on the streets and offered protection, but they also asked me to help by walking my old route again so they could watch him in the act. It felt terrifying to be asked to be bait, but I agreed because I wanted this to end. The operation felt clinical and impossible at the same time. Detectives explained every contingency: plainclothes officers 2 houses down, a marked car at a discreet distance, backup units on call. They told me where to walk, how to hold my bag, which benches to ignore. I practiced the steps until they felt mechanical because the plan relied on me being predictable. For days nothing happened. The presence of police made the street feel safer in a brittle way, like glass with a crack that had been taped. I tried to let myself believe the notebook had done the work. Then one night it didn't. It was late and the streetlights threw tired circles on the pavement. I walked my route exactly as instructed, head steady, phone visible in my hand. He emerged from the shadows with a gait that had become familiar and wrong. My heart skidded, but I kept moving. The detective's voice came to me faintly through an earpiece. "Keep walking. We have you." He fell in behind me faster than I expected. There was no notebook this time. He had learned not to be obvious. When he reached me, it happened in a single violent breath, a hand on my wrist, a cloth over my mouth and nose, and then the world narrowed to pressure and dark. I remember the muffled sound of someone shouting, the snarl of tires, and then nothing. I woke in the hospital to fluorescent light and the sharp smell of disinfectant. My head felt hollow and my limbs heavy. A detective sat by my bed, exhausted but steady, and told me they had acted the moment the man moved. Plainclothes officers tackled him within seconds of my collapse. They told me the cloth had been soaked with a sedative intended to knock me out. The thought of that made the room tilt. He was arrested and taken into custody. The notebook we had given the police tied him to more than one case. It matched routes and details in 3 missing person reports. Detectives said that without our actions, they might have taken much longer to gather the evidence. The sense of relief that washed through me was messy, part gratitude, part disbelief, part a hollow ache that the danger had existed at all. Recovery felt like stacking fragile things back into place. I had bruises and stitches that healed in a few weeks, and I had to learn to sleep without flinching. The police recommended therapy and offered continued support. There were endless interviews and statements, each one a small heave of memory: the bottle of water, the bench, the notebook, the cloth. Repeating the timeline made it feel official and also surreal, like watching myself from the side. People said brave, in ways that felt uneven with what I had done. I hadn't set out to be brave. I had felt exhausted and determined, and then I had survived. Karen was my anchor through everything. There are nights I still catch her laughing at some stupid joke and think that laughter is a kind of medicine. My grandparents were gentle and fierce. They refused to let me shrink. The legal process moved forward. The man was charged and the notebook became central evidence. Pages detailed routes, observations, and notes about several women. In court I read my statement, and the room held with a weight I had never experienced. When the verdict came, it landed like a heavy object, finally placed where it belonged. Justice is not complete, but in that moment I felt something close to finality. 2 months later, I am trying to put the pieces of ordinary life back together. I go to class, I meet friends for coffee, and I let myself make plans that feel small and safe again. There are practical changes that are now habit. I walk with company more often, I move unpredictably when I can, and I keep my phone in my hand. My grandparents check in, and those daily rituals are stitches that hold. The experience changed how I look at the world. It taught me that normal routines can be recorded and weaponized, and that attention from others matters more than we admit. It also showed me the limits of official responses when they are based only on evidence after harm. I am proud in a complicated way, proud that Karen and I did not let fear make us small, proud that we helped bring a dangerous person to account, and aware that our choices were imperfect and risky. I delayed telling this publicly because the police asked us to wait while investigations continued. Now I write because I want others to know that it's okay to push until someone listens. If you find a page in a notebook or notice a pattern that chills you, tell someone and keep pushing for action. Proof matters. Community matters. Action matters. Some nights the question I ask myself still stings. How long had he been watching me before I even noticed? We may never know the full answer. What I do know is this: doing the difficult thing, taking that proof, handing it to people who could use it, help stop someone. That knowledge doesn't erase the fear, but it changes its shape. It means that the small and frightened choices 2 girls made were the hinge for something that should never have been left to chance. If there is any final line to this, it's that courage isn't always dramatic. It's often quiet and messy. A plan hatched in a kitchen, a friend who answers a call at midnight, a grandmother who calls 3 times a day. Those small acts are louder than the quiet sequence that lets harm go unnoticed. We kept our eyes open and we acted. We are still here. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Thanks for your attention.